David de Angelis presents Ask and It Is Given, The Law of Attraction According to the Teachings of Neville Goddard, by Neville Goddard. Digitally narrated using the voice of Edward Herman. The purpose of this book is to indicate man's possibilities, to show that man can change his future, but, although modified, it again forms a deterministic sequence, beginning at the point of interference, a future consistent with modification. The most important feature of man's future is flexibility. The future, although predetermined in every detail, has many developments. At every moment of our lives, we have before us the choice as to which of the many futures we will have. There are two views of the world possessed by every man, a natural view and a spiritual view. The ancients called one the carnal mind and the other the Christ mind. We can differentiate them as ordinary consciousness, governed by our senses, and controlled imagination, governed by desire. We can recognize these two distinct centers of thought in the statement, "The natural man comprehendeth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly unto him, neither is he able to understand them, because he can judge of them only by the Spirit." 1 Corinthians 2:14. Natural vision confines reality to the moment called now. According to the natural vision, the past and the future are purely imaginary. On the other hand, spiritual vision sees the contents of time. The past and future are one with the present in spiritual vision. What for the natural man is mental and subjective, for the spiritual man is concrete and objective. The habit of seeing only what our senses allow us to see makes us totally blind to what we would otherwise see. To cultivate the faculty of seeing the invisible, we should deliberately untangle our minds from the evidence of the senses and focus our attention on an invisible state, mentally perceiving it until it acquires the clarity of reality. Seriously, thinking focused and aimed in a particular direction shuts out the other sensations and makes them disappear. We just have to focus on the desired state in order to see it. The habit of turning our attention away from the sensory region and focusing it on the invisible develops our spiritual vision and enables us to penetrate beyond the world of the senses and see that which is invisible. For from the creation of the world on, his invisible works can be clearly contemplated. Romans 1:20. This vision is totally independent of the natural faculties. Open it up and quicken it. A little practice will convince us that we can, by controlling our imagination, reshape our future in harmony with our desire. Desire is the spring of action. We could not move a single finger until we have the desire to move it. No matter what we do, we follow the desire that dominates our mind at that moment. When we change a habit, our desire to change it is stronger than the desire to keep it. The desires that drive us to action are the ones that hold our attention. A desire is nothing but the awareness of something we lack and want to make our life better. Desires always have some visible gain. The greater the gain, the more intense the desire. There is absolutely no such thing as a non-selfish desire. When there is nothing to gain, there is no desire, and consequently no action. The spiritual man speaks to the natural man in the language of desire. The key to the progress and realization of dreams in life lies in ready obedience to his voice. Obedience without delay to this voice is the immediate conviction of desire realized. To desire a state is to have it. As Pascal said, "You would not have sought me if you had not already found me." Man, by assuming the feeling of his fulfilled desire, and then by living and behaving according to this belief, changes the future in harmony with his belief. Beliefs awaken what they affirm. As soon as man acquires the feeling of his realized desire, his four-dimensional self finds the way to the attainment of this ultimate, discovers methods for its realization. I know of no other clear definition of the means by which we realize our desires than that of experiencing in the imagination what we would experience physically if we reached our goal. This imaginary experience of the goal determines the means. The four-dimensional self therefore constructs with its broad vision the means necessary to achieve the desired end. It is difficult for the undisciplined mind to assume a state denied by the senses. But here's a technique that makes it easy to recall unseen things. That is, to predict an event before it happens. People have a habit of taking simple things lightly. But this simple formula for changing the future was discovered after years of research and experiments. The first step to changing the future is to desire, which is to define your goal, to know for sure what you want. Second, construct an event that you imagine might happen to you following the fulfillment of your desire. An event that involves the fulfillment of the desire, something that will have the action of the predominant self. Third, immobilize the physical body and induce a sleep-like state by imagining yourself asleep. Lie on a bed or relax in an armchair. Then, with your eyelids closed and your attention focused on the action you intend to perform in your imagination, mentally feel yourself right into that action. Imagine at the same time that you are actually performing that action here and now. You must always be a participant in the imaginary action, not just standing back and observing, but feeling that you are actually doing the action so that the imaginary feeling is real. It is important to always remember that the proposed action must be an action that consequences the realization of your desire. Also, you must feel yourself within the action until it takes on the vividness and clarity of reality. For example, suppose you wish for a promotion at work. Receiving congratulations would be an event that would happen to you as a consequence of the realization of your desire. After choosing this as the action that you will experience in your imagination, you immobilize your body, and you induce a state of drowsiness, a sleepy state, but one in which you are still able to control the direction of your thoughts, a state in which you are effortlessly attentive. Then visualize a friend standing in front of you. Place your imaginary hand in his. Feel it solid, and carry on an imaginary conversation with him in harmony with action. Don't visualize yourself at a distant point in space and time while you are being congratulated. Instead, bring the elsewhere here and the future now. The future event is reality now in a dimensionally larger world, and strangely enough, the now in a dimensionally larger world is equivalent to the here in the ordinary three-dimensional space of daily life. The difference between feeling yourself in action, here and now, and visualizing yourself in action as if you were on the big screen, is the difference between success and failure. You can understand the difference by visualizing yourself now climbing a ladder. Then, with your eyelids closed, imagine a ladder standing in front of you and perceive yourself actually climbing it. Desire, physical immobility bordering on sleep, and imaginary action in which the self sentimentally dominates the here and now are not only important factors in modifying the future, but are also essential conditions for consciously projecting the spiritual self. When the physical body is still and we are possessed by the idea of doing something, if we imagine that we are doing it here and now, and we hold that imaginary action with increasing feeling until sleep comes, we will seem to wake up outside the physical body in a dimensionally larger world with a dimensionally expanded vision, actually doing what we desired and imagined we were doing. But whether we wake up in this place or not, we're really performing the action in the four-dimensional world, and we're going to redo it in the future here in the three-dimensional world. Experience has taught me to narrow the imaginary action down to condensing the idea that is the object of our meditation into a single gesture, and to repeat it over and over until it takes on the appearance of reality. Otherwise, our attention will wander along a trail of associations, and a multitude of associated images will come into our minds, and in a few seconds take us hundreds of miles away from our target in space, and many years away in time. If we decide to go up a particular flight of stairs, because that is the event that plausibly follows the realization of our desire, then we must restrict the action to going up that particular flight of stairs. If attention should begin to wander, return it to its task of going up the flight of stairs, and continue to do so until the imaginary action has the solidity and clarity of reality. The idea must be maintained without any special effort on our part. We must, with the least effort, permeate the mind with the sensation of desire realized. Drowsiness facilitates change because it promotes effortless attention. It need not be pushed to the state of sleep, in which we would no longer be able to control the movements of our attention. but it should be a moderate level of drowsiness in which we are still able to direct our thoughts. The most profitable way to impersonate a wish is to assume the feeling of the fulfilled wish, and then, in a dormant fulfilled state, repeat over and over like a lullaby any short phrase that implies the fulfillment of the wish, such as, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," until that single feeling of gratitude dominates the mind. Speak these words as if you were addressing them to a higher power that has done this for you. If, however, we seek a conscious projection into a larger dimensional world, we must level up the action until sleep comes. We experience in our imagination what we would feel physically if we achieved our goal, and in time we can feel it physically as we felt it in our imagination. Feed the mind on premises, that is, on assertions presumed to be true, for beliefs, though false, if carried forward to the point of a feeling of reality, will materialize into facts. For a belief, any means that promotes its realization is good. It influences the behavior of all, inspiring in everyone the movements, actions, and words that facilitate its realization. In order to understand how man models the future in harmony with his belief, simply by experiencing in imagination what he would experience in reality if he achieved his goal, we must know what is meant by the dimensionally larger world, for it is into the dimensionally larger world that we go to modify our future. Observing an event before it happens implies that the event is predetermined from the human point of view in the three-dimensional world. So to change the conditions here in the three dimensions of space, we must first change them in the four dimensions of space. Man does not know exactly what is meant by a dimensionally wider world, and he undoubtedly denies the existence of a dimensionally wider self. He is quite familiar with the three dimensions of length, width, and height, and believes that if there were a fourth dimension, it would be as clear to him as those of length, width, and height. But a dimension is not a line. It is any way of measuring things that is totally different from all other ways. That is, to measure a solid four-dimensionally, we simply measure it in every direction except length, width, and height. Is there any other way to measure an object except by length, width, and height? Time measures my life without employing the three dimensions of length, width, and height. There is no such thing as an instantaneous object. Its appearance and disappearance are measurable. It lasts for a specific amount of time. We can measure its lifespan without using the dimensions of length, width, and height. Time is ultimately a fourth way of measuring an object. The more dimensions an object has, the more substantial and real it becomes. A straight line, which lies entirely in one dimension, acquires form, mass, and substance with the addition of dimensions. What new quality would time, or the fourth dimension, bring to an object, so as to make it as superior to solids as solids are to surfaces and surfaces are to lines? Time is a means of changing experience, since all change requires time. The new quality is mutability. Observe that if we section a solid, its section will be a surface. Sectioning a surface, we get a line, and sectioning a line, we get a point. This means that a point is nothing but the section of a line, which in turn is nothing but the section of a surface, which in turn is nothing but the section of a solid, which in turn, coming to the logical conclusion, is nothing but the section of a four-dimensional object. We cannot avoid the inference that all three-dimensional objects are nothing more than sections of four-dimensional bodies. Which means, when I meet you, I meet a section of your four-dimensional self, that four-dimensional self that is invisible. In order to see the four-dimensional self, I have to look at every section or moment of your life from birth to death, and see them all as coexisting. My vision should encompass the entire assortment of sensory impressions you have experienced on Earth, plus those you have yet to experience. I should see them not in the order in which you experienced them, but as a whole. Since change is the hallmark of the fourth dimension, I should see them as a flow, a living, breathing whole. Now, if we have clearly fixed all of this in our minds, what does this mean for us in this three-dimensional world? It means that if we can move along the timeline, we can see the future and change it if we want to. This world, which we hold to be so solidly real, is only a shadow out of which and beyond which we can move at any moment. It is an abstraction of a more fundamental and dimensionally large world, a more fundamental world abstracted from an even more fundamental and large world, and so on ad infinitum. Because the absolute is unattainable by any means or analysis, no matter how many dimensions we add to the world. Man can prove the existence of a dimensionally larger world simply by focusing his attention on an invisible state and imagining that he sees and hears it. If he remains focused in this state, his present environment would vanish, and he would awaken to a dimensionally larger world in which the object of his contemplation would be visible as a concrete, objective reality. I intuitively feel that if he were to abstract his thoughts from this dimensionally wider world and retreat even further into his mind, he would once again cause an externalization of time. He would find that whenever he withdraws within his mind and causes an externalization of time, space becomes dimensionally wider. And he would conclude that both time and space are serial, and that the drama of life is but the scaling of a multidimensional block of time. Scientists will one day explain why there is a serial universe. But in practice, knowing how we use this serial universe to change the future is more important. To change the future, we only need to deal with two worlds in this infinite series: the world we know through our physical organs, and the world we perceive independently of them. I have stated that man has at every moment before him the choice of which of numerous futures will be his. But a question arises: how is this possible if man's experiences in a three-dimensional world are predetermined, which his observation of an event before it happens implies? This ability to change the future can be explained if we compare the experiences of life to this printed page. Man experiences events on Earth individually and in succession, in the same way you are now seeing the words on this page. Imagine that each word on this page represents a single sensory impression. To get the context, to understand what I mean, focus your view on the first word at the top left, and then move your view across the page from left to right, letting it linger on the words individually and in succession. By the time your eyes have reached the last word on the page, you will have grasped the meaning. But imagine that as you look at the page with all its printed words, you decide to rearrange them. You could, by rearranging them, tell a totally different story, in fact, many different stories. A dream is nothing more than uncontrolled four-dimensional thinking, that is, the rearrangement of past and future sensory impressions. Man rarely dreams events in the order in which he experiences them when awake. He usually dreams of two or more events, which are separated in time, fused into a single sensory impression, or rather he completely rearranges the sensations so that he does not recognize them when he encounters them while awake. For example, I dreamt that I was delivering a package to the restaurant in my building. The waitress said to me, "You can't leave it there," after which the elevator operator gave me some letters, and as I thanked him too. At that point, the night elevator operator appeared and waved at me. The next day, as I was leaving the apartment, I picked up some letters placed under my door. On the way down, I tipped the daytime elevator operator and thanked him for the mail, after which he thanked me for the tip. On the way home, I heard the doorman say to a delivery man, "You can't leave that there." As I was about to take the elevator, I was drawn to a familiar face in the restaurant, and as I looked in, I saw the waitress greet me with a smile. That evening, I walked the guests I had had for dinner to the elevator, and as I greeted them, the night operator waved to me. By simply rearranging some of the feelings I was destined to experience and blending them into a single impression, I constructed a dream that was a little different from my actual experience. When we have learned to control the movements of our attention in the four-dimensional world, we should be able to consciously create circumstances in the three-dimensional world. We learn this control by means of daydreaming, in which we can maintain attention effortlessly, for effortless attention is essential to changing the future. We can, in a controlled daydream, consciously construct an event that we wish to experience in the three-dimensional world. The sensory impressions we use to construct our daydream are true realities dislocated in time or in the four-dimensional world. All we do in constructing our daydream is to select from the vast array of sensations those which, correctly arranged, imply that we have fulfilled our desire. With this clearly defined dream, we relax in an armchair and induce a sleep-like state of consciousness. A state which, although bordering on sleep, allows us conscious control of the movements of our attention. So we experience in imagination what we would experience in reality if this daydream were an objective fact. In applying this technique to change the future, it is important to always remember that the only thing that occupies the mind during daydreaming is the open-eye dream, the predetermined actions and sensations that imply the realization of our desire. How the dream becomes fact is not our problem. Our acceptance of the dream as physical reality will determine its fulfillment. Let me once again remind you of the basics of prayer, which is nothing more than a controlled daydream. 1. Define your goal. Know definitively what you want. 2. Construct an event that you know would happen to you as a consequence of the fulfillment of your desire, something that will have the action of the predominant self, an event that involves the fulfillment of your desire. 3. Immobilize the physical body and induce a sleep-like state of consciousness. So, mentally feel yourself in the proposed action until the single feeling of accomplishment dominates the mind. Meanwhile, imagine that you are actually doing the action here and now so that you feel in your imagination what you would physically feel if you achieved your goal. Experience has convinced me that this is the easiest way to achieve our goal. However, my own failures would betray me if I claimed to have complete mastery of the movements of attention. But as the ancients put it, this is all I do, forgetting the past and leaning toward the future, running toward the goal to get to the prize. Letter to the Philippians. Once again, I want to remind you that the responsibility for making what you want in the world real is not on your shoulders. Don't worry about how. When you are convinced that what you want has been done, the conviction has its own way of objectifying itself. All responsibility for making it possible is removed from you. There is a short statement in the book of Exodus that expresses this. Millions of people who have read it or quoted it over the centuries have completely misunderstood it. It states, "Do not cook the kid in its mother's milk." In the King James Version, "Thou shalt not boil the kid in his mother's milk." Exodus 23:19. Countless millions of people, misunderstanding this statement, until now, the enlightened era of 1948, have not eaten dairy products along with meat. It doesn't work that way. They believe that the Bible is history, and when it says, "Thou shalt not cook the kid in his mother's milk," they will not eat milk and dairy products, such as butter and cheese, along with a plate of kid or other meat. They even have separate dishes in which they cook the meat. But now you have to apply it psychologically. You have done your meditation, and you have convinced yourself that you are what you want to be. Consciousness is God. Your attention is like the river of life, or the milk itself which nourishes and keeps alive that which has your attention. In other words, what has your attention has your life. Throughout the ages, the kid has been used as a symbol of sacrifice. You have given life to everything in your world. But there are things you no longer wish to keep alive, even though you have raised them. You are a jealous father who can easily devour his children, like Kronos. It is your right to destroy what you previously wanted when you did not know it well. Now you have detached yourself in consciousness from that previous state. It was your kid, it was your child. You embodied it and expressed it in your world. But now that you have convinced yourself that you are what you wish to be, do not look back at your former state, wondering how it will disappear from your world. For if you look back and pay attention to him, you are once again stewing that kid in his mother's milk. Do not say to yourself, "I wonder if I have really departed from that state," or, "I wonder if this and this is true." Give all your attention to the conviction that it is so, for all responsibility for making it so has been removed from you. You do not have to make it so, it is so. Appropriate what is already a fact, and live in the conviction that it is, and in a way that you don't know, I don't know, nobody knows, it objectifies itself in your world. Don't worry about the how, and don't think back to your previous state. No one who has put his hand to the plow and then turns back is fit for the kingdom of God. Luke 9:62. Simply convince yourself that this is done and suspend reason. Suspend all arguments of the conscious three-dimensional mind. Your desire is beyond the reach of the three-dimensional mind. Convince yourself that you are what you want to be. Live as if you are. And as you hold on to that belief, it will materialize. Questions and answers on the law of attraction and creative power. 1. Question: what is the meaning of the symbol on the covers of your books? Answer: it is an eye placed on a heart, which in turn is placed on a tree laden with fruit, which means that whatever you are aware of and accept as true, you will realize. What a man has in his heart is. 2. Question: I would like to get married, but I haven't found the right man. How can I imagine myself a husband? Answer: always follow your ideals, for it is the ideal state that captures the mind. Do not limit the state of marriage to a certain man, but to a full, rich, and abundant life. What you desire to experience is the joy of marriage. Do not modify your dream, but improve it by making it more enjoyable. After that, condense your desire into a single feeling, or an act that implies its fulfillment. In this Western world, the woman wears her wedding ring on the ring finger of her left hand. Being a mother does not imply being married. Intimacy does not imply being married. But a wedding ring does. Relax in a comfortable chair or lie on your back as if you were about to fall asleep. Then assume the feeling of being married. Imagine a wedding ring on your finger. Touch it. Spin it around your finger. Slide it over the knuckle. Persevere in this action until the ring takes on a distinct and realistic feel. Lose yourself in the feeling of having the ring on your finger so much that when you open your eyes, you will be surprised not to see it there. If, on the other hand, you are a man who does not wear a wedding ring, you might imagine a greater responsibility. How would you feel, for example, if you had a wife to support? Assume now the feeling of being a happily married man. 3. Question: what do I have to do to get the kind of creative inspiration it takes to write? Answer: what do you have to do? Imagine that the story has already been written and accepted by a major publishing house. Reduce the idea of being a writer to the feeling of satisfaction. Repeat the phrase "that's great" or "thank you, thank you, thank you" over and over again until you feel you've succeeded. Or imagine a friend congratulating you. There are countless ways that success is implied, but you always come to the end. If you accept the end, it will come true. Don't think about getting into the proper state of mind to write, but live and act as if you are now yourself the author you wish to be. Suppose you have the talent of writing. Think about the model you want to show on the outside. If you write a book and no one wants to buy it, you have no satisfaction. Act like people are dying to read your work. Live as if you can't write stories or books fast enough to meet the demand. Persevere in this belief, and whatever you need to achieve your goal will quickly blossom, and you'll be able to express it. 4. Question: how do I envision a larger audience at my conferences? Answer: I answer you by sharing the technique used by a very skilled professor I know. When this man first came to our country, he began giving speeches in a small hall in New York City. Even though only 50 or 60 people were present at his Sunday morning meetings, and they occupied only the first few rows, this professor would come on stage and imagine a large audience. Then he would say to the empty rows, "Can you hear me in the back there?" Today, this man lectures at Carnegie Hall in New York for about 2,500 people every Sunday morning and Wednesday evening. He wanted to speak to the crowds. He wasn't being modest. He was not kidding himself. But he imagined a crowd in his own consciousness, and the crowd came. So stand up in front of a large audience. Address this audience in your imagination. Feel as if you were on that stage, and your feeling will provide the means. 5. Question: is it possible to imagine many things at one time, or should I limit my imagination to one desire? Answer: I personally prefer to limit my imaginative act to a single thought, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stop there. During the day I can imagine many things, but instead of imagining many small things, I suggest you imagine something so large that it includes all those small things. Instead of imagining having wealth, health, and friendships, imagine being enthusiastic. You could never be enthusiastic and in pain at the same time. You could never be enthusiastic and have received an eviction threat. You could never be enthusiastic if you weren't enjoying so much friendship and love. What might it feel like to be enthusiastic without knowing what it is that produced your enthusiasm? Reduce the idea of enthusiasm to a single feeling. Isn't that great? Don't allow the rational mind to ask why, for if it does, it will start looking for a visible cause, and the feeling will be lost. Rather, repeat to yourself over and over again, isn't it great? Suspend judgment as to what it is that is great. Catch a single sensation of all that is awesome, and things will happen to you that attest to the truth of that sensation. And I promise you that it will include all those little things. 6. Question: how many times should I perform the imaginative act? For a few days or for many weeks? Answer: in the book of Genesis, the story is told of Jacob fighting with an angel. This story gives us the clue we are looking for, which is that when satisfaction is achieved, it is followed by powerlessness. When you get the feeling of reality, at least at that moment, you are mentally powerless. The desire to repeat the prayer vanishes, for it has been replaced by the feeling of accomplishment. You cannot insist on wanting what you already have. If you imagine yourself to be what you desire to be until the rapture, you no longer desire it. Your imaginative act is a creative act similar to that of a man who stops, kneels down, and receives a blessing. For as man creates his own likeness, so your imaginative act takes on the likeness of your ideal. If, however, you fail to reach the point of satisfaction, repeat the action again and again until you feel that you have reached it and virtue has left you. 7. Question: I was taught not to ask for earthly things, only spiritual growth, yet what I need is money and things. Answer: you have to be honest with yourself. In the Holy Scriptures, the question, "What do you want from me?" is always asked. Some wanted to see, some wanted to eat, some wanted to be healed or asked, "May my son live?" Your greater self speaks to you through the language of desire. Do not deceive yourself. Keeping in mind what you want, claim to have it already, for your Father will take pleasure in giving it to you, and remember, what you desire you will have. 8. Question: once we have assumed our desire, should we always keep in mind the presence of this greater self that protects and fulfills our desire? Answer: acceptance of the end will give you the means. Assume the feeling of fulfillment of your desire, and your greater self will determine the means. When you have appropriated a state as if you have already realized it, your daily activity will distract your mind from anxious thoughts, so that you are not constantly looking for a signal. You don't have to constantly think that some presence will do something on your behalf, but rather you have to know that it has already done it. Knowing what you want is already a fact. Live as if it is, and things will happen to make it real. Don't worry that there may be a presence that does something for you. The deeper, greater you has already done it. All you have to do is go to the place where you will meet it. Remember the story of the man who returned from his master's house and met the servant who said to him, "Your son is alive." And when he asked him at what hour he was healed, the servant replied, "At 7 o'clock. The very hour he had believed in the fulfillment of the wish, it had been fulfilled, for it was at 7 o'clock that his master had said to him, "Thy son shall live." Your wish is already fulfilled. Act as if it were, and although time passes slowly in this dimension of your being, it will nevertheless bring you confirmation of your supposition. I ask you, however, not to be impatient. If there is only one thing you really need, it is patience. 9. Question: Isn't there a law that says you can't get anything for nothing? Must we not earn what we desire? Answer: creation is finished. It is your Father's pleasure to give you his kingdom. The parable of the prodigal son is the answer you seek. Despite man's squandering, the moment he remembered who he really was, he fed on the fatted calf and put on the robes and ring of authority. There is nothing to be gained. Creation ended when time was invented. You, as man, are God who made himself visible for the purpose of showing what is, not what will be. Don't think you have to work hard and sweat to be saved. The harvest is 4 months away. The fields are already blond. You just have to sink your scythe into them. 10. Question: but doesn't the thought that creation is finished rob us of our initiative? Answer: if you can observe an event before it happens, it means that the event that is going to happen must be predetermined from the point of view of the person living in this three-dimensional world. Yet it is not necessary for you to encounter such an event. By changing your concept of you, you can interfere with your future and shape it in harmony with your new concept of you. 11. Question: but doesn't this ability to change the future deny the fact that creation is finished? Answer: no. By changing your concept of you, you change your relationship to things. If in a game you change the order of the letters to form a new word, you have not created new words, you have simply had the pleasure of rearranging the letters. Your concept of you determines the order of events that happen to you. Events have existed since the birth of the world, but not their temporal arrangement. 12. Question: why is it that those who apply themselves hard in metaphysics always seem to lack something? Answer: because he didn't really apply metaphysics. I'm not talking about a cowardly approach to life, but a daily application of the law of consciousness. Once you appropriate your desire, you don't need a person or state to act as a conduit to make it happen. Living in a man's world, I need money in my everyday life. If I invite you to lunch tomorrow, I have to pay the bill. When I leave a hotel, I have to pay the amount. To take the train to New York, I have to buy the train ticket. I need money, and this must be there. I will not say, God knows I need money. Rather, I will make that money my own as if it were really there. We must live courageously. We must live as if we own what we want to own. Don't think that just because you've helped others, someone else will see your good deed and somehow help you with your problems. There is no one else who will do it for you. You yourself must courageously appropriate what your Father has already given you. 13. Question: can an uneducated person self-educate by assuming the feeling of being educated? Answer: yes. Great interest is rewarded with information from all over. You must sincerely desire to be well educated. The desire to be a good reader, followed by the assumption that you already are, makes you selective in your reading. As your education increases, you will automatically become more selective, more critical in everything you do. 14. Question: my husband and I are taking his class together. Should we discuss our desires with each other? Answer: there are 2 spiritual sayings in the Bible. One is, tell no one. The other is, I have told you now before it comes to pass, that when it comes to pass, you may believe. It takes spiritual courage to tell another person that your wish has come true before you can perceive it externally. If you do not possess this kind of courage, you would do well to keep quiet. Personally, I like to tell my wife about my plans because then both of us are so excited when they come true. Usually the first person a man wants to prove this law to is his wife. Muhammad is said to be eternally great because his first disciple was his wife. 15. Question: should my husband and I work on the same project or on separate projects? Answer: this is totally up to you. My wife and I have different interests, yet we have a lot in common. Do you remember the story I told about our return to the United States last spring? I had felt a duty as a husband to find a ride back to America, and so I appropriated it. I feel there are some things that are my wife's duty, like keeping the house clean and nice and finding the right school for my daughter. So she takes care of those things. Often my wife asks me to imagine for her, as if she has more faith in my ability to do so than in her own. This honors me as any man worthy of the name wishes to feel that his family trusts him. However, I see nothing wrong with the common commitment between two people who love each other. 16. Question. It occurs to me that if you let yourself go too often into a state of drowsiness, then you will have a lack of feelings. Answer. When I talk about feelings, I don't mean emotions, but the acceptance that the wish has come true. When you feel grateful, fulfilled, relieved, it's easy to exclaim, "Thank you, isn't this great?" Or, "It's over." Once you reach the state of gratitude, you can either wake up aware that you have succeeded or fall asleep with the feeling of wish fulfillment. 17. Question. Is love a product of our own consciousness? Answer. Everything exists in your consciousness, whether it is hate or love. Nothing comes from the outside. The hills that you observe in search of an answer belong to an inner landscape. Your feelings of love, hate, or indifference all arise from your consciousness. You are infinitely greater than you can ever perceive yourself to be. Never in all eternity will you be able to reach the utmost of you. That is how wonderful you are. Love is not a product of you. You are love. For that is what God is, and the name of God is I Am, that same name by which you define yourself before affirming the state in which you are presently. 18. Question. Suppose my will cannot come true before 6 months or a year. Should I wait before imagining it? Answer. When desire is born in you, that is the moment to accept it in its fullness. Perhaps it's not a coincidence that that need came to you at that very moment. Your three-dimensional being may think that it cannot happen now, but your four-dimensional mind knows that it is already there. So you must accept the desire now as a physical fact. Imagine you want to build a house. The need for it is there right now, but it will take time for the trees to grow and for the carpenter to build it. Although the need seems excessive, don't wait just to adjust to it. Assert possession of it even now, and let it objectify itself in its unusual way. Don't say it will take 6 months or a year. The very moment you are overwhelmed with desire, already take it for granted as a fact. You and only you have given your desire a time frame, and time is relative in this world. Don't wait for something to come true. Accept it now as if it's already there and watch to see what happens. When you feel a desire, it is the deepest you, whom men call God, speaking. He is prompting you, through desire, to accept that what is not what will be. Desire is simply his communion with you, who is telling you that your desire belongs to you now. Your acceptance of it will be evidenced by your complete adjustment to it, as if it were true. 19. Question. Why do some of us die young? Answer. Our lives, considered in retrospect, are not measured by years, but by the content of those years. 20. Question. How would you define a full life? Answer. A variety of experiences. The more varied they are, the richer your life is. When you die, you enter a dimensionally larger world and play your piece on a keyboard composed of the experiences of human life. So the more varied your experiences, the more refined your instrument, and the richer your life. 21. Question. What about an infant who dies at birth? Answer. A child born lives forever, for nothing dies. It might seem that an infant who died at birth does not have that keyboard made of human experience. But as one poet said, he drew a circle that excluded me as a heretic, a rebel, one to be mocked. But love and I found the ingenuity to win. We drew a circle that included him. The beloved has access to the sensory experiences of the lover. God is love. Therefore, in the final moment, all have an instrument, the keyboard of which is made up of the sensory impressions of all men. 22. Question. What is your prayer technique? Answer: it all starts with desire, for desire is the spring of action. You must know and define your goal, then condense it into a feeling that implies realization. When your desire is well defined, immobilize your physical body and live, in your imagination, the action that implies its realization. Repeat this act over and over again until it takes on a vividness and a feeling of reality. Or condense your desire into a single phrase that implies fulfillment, such as, "Thank you, Father." That's great, or it's over. Repeat this condensed phrase or action over and over in your imagination. After that, arouse yourself from that state, or let yourself slip into the depths. It is indifferent, for the act is done once you have completely perceived it as done in that sleeping, drowsy state. 23. Question: two persons want the same office. One holds it. The other had it, and now wants it back. Answer: your Father, your dimensionally greater you, has ways and means that you do not know. Accept His wisdom. Feel that your desire is fulfilled, after which allow your Father to give it to you. The person currently in office could be promoted to a higher position, or marry a very wealthy person and quit their job. He might inherit a large sum of money, or choose to move to another state. Many people say they want to work, but I highly doubt it. What they want is security, and they associate security with work. But I doubt the average guy really wants to wake up in the morning and go to work. 24. Question: what is the cause of illness and pain? Answer: the physical body is a filter for the emotions. Many of man's ailments, which until yesterday were considered purely physical, are now recognized as originating in emotional disorders. Pain comes from lack of relaxation. When you are asleep, you feel no pain. If you are under anesthesia, you feel no pain because you are, so to speak, relaxed. If you feel pain, it is because you are tense and you are trying to force something. But you cannot force an idea to take shape. You simply have to take possession of it. It's about effortless attention. Only practice will bring you to the point where you know how to be attentive while being relaxed. Attention is tending toward an end, and relaxation is exactly the opposite. They are two totally opposite notions that you will have to mix until you learn with practice to be attentive but not tense. The word affirmation means effortless attention. In the state of affirmation, you are caught up in the idea without being tense. 25. Question: no matter how hard I try to be happy, deep down I always have the melancholy feeling of being excluded. Why? Answer: because you feel unwanted. If I were you, I'd assume I was wanted. You know the technique. The assumption of being wanted may seem false at first, but if you feel wanted and respected and persist in that assumption, you will be amazed at how much others will seek you out. They will begin to see those qualities in you that they have never seen before. I promise you, if you imagine that you are wanted, you will be. 26. Question: if the death of a loved one brought me economic security, would it mean that I caused that death? Answer: don't think for a moment that you could have caused a death by imagining your financial security. Your greatest you will never hurt anyone. He sees everyone, and, knowing everyone's lifespan, can suggest the person to give you what can fulfill your wish. You did not kill the person who named you in his will. If a few days after your complete acceptance of the idea of economic stability, Uncle John left this three-dimensional sphere and left you his property, it was only because it was time for Uncle John to go. He did not die a second before his time. Your greater you observed John's lifespan and used him as a means to realize your feeling of stability. Acceptance of the end makes you find the means to that end. Don't worry about anything but the end. Always keep in mind that the responsibility of making it real does not rest on your shoulders. Your desire belongs to you because you have accepted it. 27. Question: I have more than one goal. Would it be ineffective to focus on several goals at different times of concentration? Answer: I prefer to have a single intense ambition and narrow it down to a single short sentence or act involving accomplishment, but I don't limit my ambition. I simply know that my true goal will include all the other lesser ones. 28. Question. I find it difficult to change my concept of myself. Why? Answer. Because your desire to change has not been stimulated. If you fell in love with what you really want to become, you would become it. It takes an intense longing to accomplish self-transformation. As the hind longs for streams of water, so my soul longs for you, O God. If you would become as thirsty for perfection as the doe is for water enough to challenge the ferocity of the tiger in the forest, you would become perfect. 29. Question. I am considering the idea of a business venture. It would mean a lot to me, but I can't imagine how it would come to fruition. Answer. You are relieved of that responsibility. You don't have to make it a reality, it already is. Although your concept of you seems so far removed from the business venture you are thinking about, it exists now as a reality within you. Ask yourself how you would feel and what you would do if your business venture were a great success. Identify with that character and feeling, and you will be amazed at how quickly you will realize your dream. The only sacrifice required of you is to let go of your current concept of you and take ownership of the desire you want to express. 30. Question. As a student of metaphysics, I was taught that racial prejudices and universal beliefs influence me. Do you mean that I am influenced by them only to the extent that I give these beliefs power over me? Answer. Yes. It's just your personal viewpoint, as your world always bears witness to your current concept of you. If someone offends you, change your concept of you. That is the only way you can change others. Today's newspaper can be read by any 6 people in this room, and no 2 will interpret the same news in the same way. One will be elated by it, another dejected, another indifferent, and so on. Yet it is the same news. Universal beliefs, racial prejudices, call them what you will, are not important to you. What matters is your concept not of another, but of yourself, for it is the concept you have of yourself that determines the concept you have of others. Forget about others. What are they for you? Follow your own desires. The law is always active, always true. Your consciousness is the stone on which all structures rest. Pay attention to what you are aware of. You need not worry about others, for you are supported by the truth of this law. No man comes to you of his own choice, whether he is good, bad, or indifferent. He does not choose you. It is you who chose him. He has come because of what you are. You cannot forcibly destroy the state that another person represents. Rather leave him alone. What is he to you? Rise to a higher level of consciousness, and you will find a new world waiting for you. And when you sanctify others, others will be sanctified. 31. Question. Who wrote the Bible? Answer. The Bible was written by wise men who used solar and phallic myths to reveal psychological truths. But we have mistaken their allegories for history, and thus have failed to grasp their true message. It is strange, but when the Bible was published to the world, and there seemed to be acceptance, the great library of Alexandria was destroyed by fire, erasing all traces of how the Bible came to be. Few can read in other languages, so they cannot compare their beliefs with others. Our churches do not encourage us to compare. How many of the millions of people who accept the Bible as fact question it? Believing it to be the Word of God, they blindly accept the words, and in so doing miss the essence they contain. Having accepted the vehicle, they do not understand what the vehicle carries. 32. Question. Do you use the Apocrypha Bible? Answer. Not in my teachings. I have many volumes of them at home. They are no more grandiose than the 66 books in our official Bible. They simply tell the same truth in a different way. For example, it tells the story of Jesus who, as a young boy, watched children create birds out of mud. Holding them in their hands, they pretended the birds were flying. Jesus came up and knocked the birds out of their hands. As the children cried, he picked up a broken one and reshaped it. Holding it up, he blew on it, and the bird put on wings. Here is the story of the one who came to destroy the idols of men's minds, and then show them how to use the same substance and reshape it into a beautiful form and give it life. This is what this story tries to suggest. I came not to bring peace, but a sword. Truth kills all the mud chicks of the mind. It kills illusions and reshapes them into a new pattern that sets man free. 33. Question: if Jesus is a fictional character created by the authors of the Bible in order to explain certain psychological situations, how do you explain the fact that he and his philosophy are also mentioned in the secular and non-Christian historical texts of the time? Weren't Pontius Pilate and Herod Roman officials in the flesh at the time? Answer: the story of Jesus is identical to that of Krishna, the savior of the Hindus. They are the same psychological character. It has been imagined that both were born to virgin mothers. The rulers of the time tried to kill them as infants. They both healed the sick, raised the dead, taught the gospels of love, and died as martyrs for humanity. Hindus, like Christians, believe that their savior is God-made man. Today people quote Socrates, yet the only proof of Socrates' existence is found in the works of Plato. It is said that Socrates drank hemlock. But I ask you, who is Socrates? I once quoted a line from Shakespeare, and a woman said to me, but Hamlet said that. Hamlet never said that. It was Shakespeare who wrote the lines and put those words in the mouth of the character he created and called Hamlet. St. Augustine once said, what is now called the Christian religion already existed among the ancients. They began to call Christianity the true religion, although it had never existed. 34. Question: do you use affirmation and negation? Answer: forget about those schools of thought that use affirmations and negations. The best affirmation, as well as the only effective one, is that assumption which implies in itself the negation of the previous state. The best negation is total indifference. Things wither and die by means of indifference. They are instead kept alive by means of attention. One cannot deny a thing by asserting that it does not exist. Rather, you give it life by recognizing it, and what you recognize as true will be true for you, whether it is good, bad, or indifferent. 35. Question: is it possible for a person to look dead and yet not be dead? Answer: General Lee is thought to have been born 2 years after his mother, who was given up for dead, was buried alive. Luckily for her, she was not embalmed or buried underground, but in a grave from where someone heard her scream and released her. 2 years later, Mrs. Lee gave birth to a son who later became General Lee. He is part of the history of this country. 36. Question: how can a person who was disadvantaged in childhood be successful in life? Answer: we are creatures of habit, constructing mental patterns that are repeated over and over again. Although habit acts as an impulsive rule that drives us to repeat that pattern, it is not a law, as we can modify those patterns. Many successful men like Henry Ford, Rockefeller, and Carnegie were underprivileged people in their childhood. Many of our country's high-achieving names came from needy families, yet they left behind great achievements in the political, artistic, or financial fields. One evening, a friend of mine attended a meeting for young advertising executives. The speaker of the evening said to these young men, "I have but one thing to say to you tonight, and that is that if you make yourselves great, you cannot fail." He took a fish bowl and filled it with a bag of English nuts and one of small beans. He mixed them with the mai, began to shake the bowl, and said, "This bowl is life. You cannot stop its shaking, since life is a constantly pulsating and active rhythm. But watch." And as they watched, the large nuts came to the surface, and the small beans went down. Looking into the bowl, the man asked, "Which of you is complaining, wondering why?" He added, "Strange, the sound is coming from inside the bowl and not outside." Abin is complaining that if he had grown up in the same environment as the nut, he too could have done great things. But he never got the chance. Then he took a bin from the bottom of the bowl and put it on top, saying, I can bring the bin to the surface forcibly, but I cannot prevent the bowl of life from shaking, and in shaking the bowl again, the little bin slipped back to the bottom. Hearing another complaint, he asked, "What is it that I hear? Are you saying I should take one of the big ones that feels so big and put him on the bottom and see what happens to him? Do you think he will be limited like you, because the opportunity to achieve great things will be taken away from him like it happened to you? Let's see." Then the lecturer took one of the large nuts and pushed it to the bottom of the bowl, saying, "I can't stop the bowl from shaking anyway." And as the young men watched, the nut came up again. Then the man added, "Gentlemen, if you want to be successful in life, grow up." My friend took this message to heart and began to imagine himself as a successful businessman. Today he has truly become a big shot, if you judge success by money. He currently employs over 1,000 people in the city of New York. Any one of you can do what he has done. You presume to be what you want to be. Live in that presumption, and it will come true. Research, Victoria, the realization of a dream. Once during a resting period at the sea, I meditated on the perfect state and wondered what I would be if I had eyes so pure as not to see injustice, if everything appeared to me immaculate, and if I were without sin. As I lost myself in these fiery reflections, I found myself levitating above the darkness of the senses. It was a sensation so intense that I felt like a creature of fire inhabiting a body of air. I heard voices of a celestial choir, exalted as one who had won a battle with death, singing, "He is risen, he is risen." And intuitively I knew they were referring to me. Then it seemed to me that I was walking in the night. Soon I came upon a scene that resembled that of the ancient pool of Bethsaida, for there stood a multitude of disabled people, blind, lame, shrunken, who were not, however, waiting for the waters to stir, as in the ancient tradition, but waiting for me. As I approached, without any thought or effort on my part, one by one, they reshaped themselves as if by the work of the wizard of beauty. Eyes, hands, feet, all the defective limbs, came from some invisible reserve and molded themselves in harmony with that perfection which I felt emanating within me. When all were restored to perfection, the chorus exulted, "It is finished." Then the scene faded, and I awoke. I know that this vision resulted from my intense meditation on the idea of perfection, for all my meditations inevitably lead to union with the state contemplated. I had been so absorbed in that idea that for a moment I had become what I had contemplated, and the noble purpose with which I had identified myself at that moment had attracted to itself noble things and shaped my vision in harmony with my inner nature. The ideal with which we are united works by association of ideas so as to awaken thousands of feelings and to create a situation corresponding to the main idea. I first discovered this close connection between feelings and visions when I was about 7 years old. I realized that a mysterious life was moving within me like a stormy ocean of frightening power. I could always tell when I was about to conjoin with this mysterious identity, for on the nights when I had these visitations, my senses were in a state of expectation, and I knew with certainty that before morning I would find myself alone in front of immensity. I dreaded these visitations so much that I would lie awake in bed until my eyes closed from exhaustion. As my eyes closed and I fell asleep, I was no longer alone, but was assailed deep within by another being. Yet I knew that he was myself. He seemed older than the world, yet he was closer to me than my teenage years. If I tell what I discovered on those nights, it is not to impose my ideas on others, but so that I can give hope to those who seek the law of life. I discovered that that sense of expectation acted as a magnet that connected me with this higher me, while my fears made it seem like a stormy sea. As a young boy, I saw this mysterious me as powerful, and in joining him, I perceived his majesty as a stormy ocean that was bathing me, tossing me about and tossing me about as if I were a helpless wave. As a grown man, I then perceived him as love and myself as his child, and now, in uniting myself to him, how much love envelops me. He is the mirror of all. Whatever conception we have of him, he embodies it for us. I believe that it is the central point through which all the threads of the universe wind, So I have modified my values and changed my ideas so that they depend on and are in harmony with it, which is the only cause of all that exists. It is for me that immutable reality that shapes the circumstances in harmony with our concept of ourselves. My mystical experiences have convinced me that there is no other way to achieve that outer perfection we seek than to transform ourselves. The moment we succeed in transforming ourselves, the world will magically dissolve before our eyes and reshape itself in harmony with what our transformation affirms. I am going to tell you about two other visions because they confirm the truth of my observation that we, thanks to the intensity of hate and love, become what we contemplate. Once, with my eyes closed and made bright by thoughts, I was meditating on the eternal question, who am I? And I felt myself gradually dissolving in an endless sea of vibrant light, while my imagination went beyond all fear of death. In that state, there was nothing but myself, an endless ocean of liquid light. I had never felt more intimate with being. I don't know how long the experience lasted, but my return to Earth was accompanied by the distinct feeling that I was resuming a human form. Another time, I was lying on the bed with my eyes closed as if in sleep and meditating on the mystery of Buddha. By and by, the dark recesses of my brain began to light up. I felt as if I were surrounded by luminous clouds that emanated from my head like pulsating circles of fire. For a while I saw nothing but these luminous circles. Then a quartz crystal appeared before my eyes. As I watched, the crystal broke into pieces that invisible hands transformed into the living Buddha. Looking at this meditative being, I saw that it was myself. I was the living Buddha I had contemplated. A light as strong as the sun shone from this living image of myself with increasing intensity until it exploded. Then slowly the light went out, and once again I found myself in the darkness of my room. From what sphere or treasure of creation came this superhuman being? His robes? Crystal? Light? If it was a world of real beings in which I moved, looked, felt, there where the lame, the infirm, the blind were transformed into harmony with my inner nature, then my theory of having another body more subtle than the physical, a body which can be detached from the physical and used in other spheres, is right, for looking, feeling, moving are functions of the organism, however ethereal it may be. If I evaluate the possibility that my psychic experiences were self-fulfilling fantasies, I feel no less driven to ask questions about this more powerful me, projecting into my mind a real situation like those I experience while awake. I have indulged in these passionate meditations many times, and I know without a shadow of a doubt that both suppositions are true. Within this earthly body dwells another belonging to a world of light, and I, by intense meditation, have drawn it as with a magnet out of the skull of this dark abode of flesh. The first time I conjured these fires within me, I feared my head might explode. I felt an intense vibration at the base of my skull, then a sudden oblivion of everything. Then I found myself dressed in clothes of light and hanging by a silver elastic cord from my sleeping body on the bed. My feelings were so ecstatic that I felt close to the stars. In those clothes I passed through spheres that were more familiar to me than Earth, and yet I found that, just as on Earth, circumstances shaped themselves in harmony with my nature. Already I hear you say self-fulfilling fantasies. Not unlike things on Earth. I am an immortal being who perceives himself as a man and shapes the worlds in the image and likeness of his own self-concept. What we imagine, we are. By our imagination we have created the dream of life, and by our imagination we will return to that eternal world of light, becoming what we were before we imagined the world. In the divine economy, nothing is lost. We cannot lose anything except by abandoning the sphere in which this thing has its natural existence. There is no power of transformation in death, and whether we are here or there, we shape the world around us by the intensity of our imagination and feelings, and we illuminate or darken our lives by the concepts we have of ourselves. Nothing is more important to us than our concept of ourselves, and this is especially true of our concept of that deep and hidden self within us. Those who help or hinder us, whether they know it or not, are the servants of that law, which molds external circumstances into harmony with our inner nature. It is our conception of ourselves that liberates or imprisons us, though it may use external agents to accomplish its purpose. Since life molds the outer world to reflect the inner disposition of our minds, there is no way of achieving the outer perfection we seek except by transforming ourselves. No help comes to us from outside. The hills towards which we look belong to an inner landscape. It is therefore to our own consciousness that we must look as the only reality, as the only foundation on which every phenomenon rests. We can trust completely that the justice of that law will give us only what is in our nature. To try to change the world before we have changed our concept of ourselves is to struggle against the nature of things. There can be no external change until there is first an internal one. As it is within, so it is without. I am not encouraging philosophical indifference when I suggest that we should imagine ourselves as already being what we want to be, living in a mental atmosphere of grandiosity, instead of using physical means and arguments to bring about the desired change. Whatever we do, if it is not accompanied by a change of consciousness, is but a futile touching up of the surface. No matter how hard we toil and toil, we can receive nothing more than what our unconscious assumptions affirm. To protest against what happens to us is to protest against the law of our own being and against our control of our own destiny. The events of my life are too closely connected to my concept of myself for them not to have been drawn out, by the work of my spirit, from some magical storehouse of my being. If these events cause me pain, I must be fooling myself, for I move and live in a world that corresponds to my concept of myself. Intense meditation generates a union with the contemplated state, and during this union, we have visions, experiences, and behaviors that match our change in consciousness. This shows us that a transformation of consciousness will result in a change of environment and behavior. However, our ordinary alterations of consciousness, in passing from one state to another, are not transformations, since each is quickly followed by an opposite one. But whenever a state becomes so stable as to eliminate its rivals permanently, it is then that habitual and central state defines our character and constitutes a true transformation. To say that we have been transformed means that those ideals which were formerly marginal in our consciousness now occupy a central place and constitute the habitual channel of our energy. All wars show that violent emotions are extremely powerful in accelerating mental changes. Every great conflict is always followed by a period of materialism and greed in which the ideals that were supposedly fought for are lost. This is inevitable because war evokes hatred, which leads to a descent in consciousness from the plane of the ideal to the lowest level where war is fought. If we were as passionate about our ideals as we are about what we hate, we would rise to the level of ideals as easily as we now fall to the level of hatred. Love and hate have a magical power of transformation, and by exercising them, we assume the likeness of that which we contemplate. Through intense hatred, we create in ourselves the character we imagine our enemy to have. Qualities die from lack of attention, so it is better to erase an unpleasant state by imagining a crown instead of ashes, gladness instead of mourning, than to attack directly that state from which we wish to free ourselves. That which is virtue and deserves praise. Let all this be the object of your thoughts, for we become that with which we relate. There is nothing to change but our concept of the self. Humanity is one being despite its many forms and faces, and within it there is only that apparent difference that we perceive in our own being when we dream. The images and events we see in dreams are creations of our own imagination and do not exist except in us. The same is true of the images and events we see in this dream that is life. They reveal to us our concept of ourselves. The moment we are able to transform the self, our world will dissolve and resume form in harmony with what our change affirms. The universe we study with such dedication is a dream, and we are the dreamers of that dream, eternal dreamers dreaming non-eternal dreams. Someday, like Nebuchadnezzar, we will awaken from the dream, from the nightmare in which we struggled with demons, and we will discover that in fact we had never left our eternal home, that we were never born and never died except in our dream. This recording of Ask and It Is Given, The Law of Attraction According to the Teachings of Neville Goddard, by Neville Goddard, was presented by David De Angelis. Sound recording copyright 2022 and produced by DeepSend Limited 2022.